Other court in London. But first we'll discuss the week in politics. And earlier tonight I was joined from Adelaide by the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Health, Labor's Nick Champion, and in Sydney by the Coalition's Paul Fletcher, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Communications. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
150 or so Tamils are said to have been intercepted at sea trying to make their way to Australia. Paul Fletcher, what does the future hold for those people?
Well, as the Immigration Minister has said on a number of occasions this week, we don't comment on water operational matters, and the reason for that is that we don't want to give people smugglers information which may be of assistance to them. But we are consistently and calmly implementing the policies that we took to the 2013 election, and we've not had a successful people smuggling venture arrive in Australia since mid-December last year.
That doesn't mean there haven't been successful departures.
Well, we've not had a successful people smuggling venture arrive in Australia since December last year, and that's a contrast with what we saw under the previous government when there were some 50,000 people who arrived by boat without a visa, and of course, tragically, some 1,200 deaths at sea. And so what we are focused on is safety at sea and, of course, meeting our international obligations.
Nick Champion, the government has stopped the boats. Don't they deserve credit for that?
Well, I think, Paul, the last part of Paul's answer is the important one, and that is our international requirements. And really, at the heart of the Refugee Convention is an obligation not to return people to persecution, and that would be our main concern, I think, with the speculation about these particular boats, is that people are being very quickly assessed, that's what's being alleged, and then being returned potentially to the Sri Lankan Navy. So there are some very real concerns, but I suppose it's very hard to make judgments about what the government's doing because of the complete lack of transparency in this area. And that should be of a concern to every Australian because we do want to fulfil our obligations under the Refugee Convention, because that is an important set of principles that was handed down after the terrible experiences around the Jewish people in World War II.
What of Paul Fletcher's comment about denying people smugglers that information that would potentially assist their operations?
Well, I think you've got to balance these things, and we've got to balance, obviously, combating people smuggling ventures with, you know, the right of the Australian people to know what the government is doing in their name. And transparency is seen to be a good thing, generally, by politicians in relation to government. It helps the opposition, journalists and the people of Australia hold the government to account. And in this area, of all areas, a very contentious area, an area that excites the passions, we've got a government that is just, you know, snubbing its nose at, or thumbing its nose at democracy. So, a basic principle of democracy.
Paul Fletcher, why should Australians be denied any information at all about what steps the Navy is taking to stop the boats?
Well, what you've seen from Immigration and Border Protection Minister Scott Morrison over the time that he's been in that job and doing a very successful and effective job, he's been regularly updating the Australian people and the media when there are things to say. But
when he decides there are things to say.
But the first priority here must be achieving the operational objectives, and so it's been the consistent policy from the time we've come to government that we don't comment on water operational matters, and the reason for that is very clearly because we do not want to share information with people smugglers that might assist them with their illegal trade.
Is part of the reason also because potentially the Australian public might not find too palatable the things that are being done at sea?
No, the reason is very clearly about the importance of achieving the operational objectives and not getting back to the chaotic situation we had under the Labor Party, where first of all we saw the policy flip-flopping back and forth, but secondly we saw some 50,000 boat arrivals, people arriving without a visa, and we saw some 1,200 deaths at sea. So there's a very clear objective here, which is to give effect to the policies that we took to the 2013 election. We've been working through that calmly and consistently, and of course we will continue with the approach that we don't comment on on-water operational matters because of the importance of achieving the overall objectives here.
Nick Champion, the Senate has denied the government's attempts to reinstate temporary protection visas, so the Immigration Minister is now expected to introduce a new national interest test to assess asylum claims. What's Labor's view on that?
Well, look, what we've got is a minister who hides from accountability, is potentially placing people back into a very uncertain environment in Sri Lanka, and the government's own travel advice warns of that, security situation in Sri Lanka being unstable, being that various journalists and other foreign aid workers have been the subject of attack and the like. So we've got a very strange situation, and on this we've got him thumbing his nose at the High Court. So what we've got is a minister who hides from the media, who seems to want to go around the basic safeguards in our democracy, and we've got an operation that's shrouded in secrecy. So it's of great concern to Australians, and it's not critical to securing our borders. What's critical to securing our borders is offshore processing.
Paul Fletcher, the UNHCR, says those who seek asylum should be properly and individually screened for protection needs. If protection issues are raised, they should be properly determined through a substantive and fair refugee status determination to establish if any of them are at risk of persecution. Can that kind of comprehensive screening take place on the high seas?
Well, the government is of course fully aware of our international obligations under the UN Refugee Convention, and we will meet those obligations, and we continue to do so.
Do you know personally if the operations that are underway will meet the convention?
The Minister, Minister Morrison, as well as the Prime Minister, have made it clear, as has the Foreign Minister and other senior ministers, that we are fully aware of our obligations, and that we are and will continue to meet our obligations.
Stopping the boats may well have stopped drownings at sea, but how many people will potentially be killed or tortured or persecuted when they're returned to their countries of origin?
Well, again, can I just repeat the point that we took to the election a series of commitments in relation to border protection and in relation to the issue of people arriving by boat without visas. We did so because of the importance of having an orderly migration program and because of the importance of stopping people dying at sea. 1,200 deaths at sea during the time that Labor was in government, and so that is the set of commitments that we've taken, including temporary protection visas and offshore processing, and where safe to do so, turning around boats. Those were the policies we took to the election, and those are the policies we're working calmly and methodically to implement.
Nick Champion?
Well, the concern is there is no way of testing these claims because the government shrouds everything they do in this veil of secrecy, and we wouldn't tolerate it in any other area except for maybe a period of war. But I suspect that the Curtin government was more free with information than this government is, and it's a great concern to Australians. Offshore processing is important to combating irregular maritime arrivals, but I don't think we should be shrouding things in secrecy, and I think we should all have grave reservations about particularly Tamil refugees being returned back to Sri Lanka, where we know there's been a very bitter civil war and where the situation has not returned to normal, and the government's own travel advice that's issued by DFAT illustrates that point.
Now, the new Senate sits next week and will include a disparate group of people on the crossbenches. Many have already expressed their concern about parts of the budget. Are you, Paul Fletcher, resigned to the fact that many of the measures, like the Medicare co-payment and the deregulation of university fees, just won't get up?
Well, look, as the Prime Minister has made clear, as the Treasurer has made clear, we intend to work with the Senate and particularly with the newly arrived senators to make the case for all of the measures that were contained in our budget.
Making the case and having them agreed to are two very different things, though, aren't they?
Well, but what we'll be doing is working with all of the senators who want to talk to us to explain to them the reasons why we've got these measures.
And is there wiggle room
Australia
to negotiate?
been in an unsustainable position, and you've got the Labor government.
You don't have to make the case to me. You have to make the case to them. And what I'm asking you is, and I'm sure they're very well aware of your position, what I'm asking you is there wiggle room to negotiate and make changes so they do eventually pass?
We will negotiate and engage with all of the senators, all of the democratically elected senators. Every one of them has a vote of equal value. When the Labor Party has gone back on $5 billion worth of measures that it included in its 2013-14 budget and is now saying we will not pass the legislation even though we assumed those savings in our budget. When the Greens are refusing to support a measure to return indexation of fuel excise when that has always been their policy, that extraordinary opportunism and irresponsibility that we're facing, we will deal with all of the senators in the Senate. We'll do so in a courteous fashion, and we will engage with them in a way to make the case for the changes in for the budget measures, because they're so important to get Australia off an unsustainable spending path and get the budget back under control.
Nick Champion, the Treasury Secretary Martin Parkinson and Glenn Stevens, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, have both publicly supported the budget and they've said it's broadly sensible. Is Labor honestly concerned about issues of fairness, or is the opposition to the budget really just about political point scoring?
Well, Emma, this is a very brutal budget, and it's a budget without a mandate, without an electoral mandate. It's basically
But two of the country's top public servants in the Treasury and Reserve Bank entirely disagree with you.
Well, both of those individuals are not elected. They're appointed. With all due respect to them, they're not politicians. And what
they both served under Labor as well. Are you saying they're partisan?
Well, I'm not saying they're partisan, but what I'm saying is this is a budget that has to be decided upon on the Senate, and it has to be decided upon on whether it's fair. And there's very few Australians who would assert that the $7 co-payment, which is $7 every time you see a doctor, every time you get a blood test, every time you've got multiple trips to the doctors, you'll pay 7 plus 7 plus 7. There are very few Australians who think that's anything but an assault on Medicare, on universal health care, on one of the things that has made this country a fair and equitable place that fits in with our national character of having a fair go. And this government wants to shred it without an electoral mandate. So there's that, there's the assault on families, there's the cuts in various areas to health and education, $80 billion worth of cuts, all without an electoral mandate. And this government expects the Senate to sort of, just vote it through. Well, I think they're in for a rude shock. The people of Australia look very dimly on this budget. The fact that it's still being discussed around barbecues and kitchen tables all over this country is very bad news for the government, and I doubt very much whether the Senate will get on board with such a disastrous budget.
The barbecues and kitchen tables, you're around, Paul Fletcher, what are they saying there?
I think the people I talk to recognise that Labor left Australia in an unsustainable financial position with deficit after deficit after deficit, including a $50 billion deficit in 2013-14.
Is that what the people in your electorate are focused on in this budget?
People I talk to are certainly very concerned about the financial sustainability of the Australian government and how do we continue to afford things like Medicare. Now, Medicare is not under threat, but what is important is that it be sustainable. So that's why we've proposed the particular co-payment measure. And
yet the co-payment money is going into a medical research fund. If it was about sustaining the healthcare budget, wouldn't it be going into consolidated revenues?
And that research fund will build up over time to a peak to reach $20 billion. It will roughly double the amount of money going into medical research in Australia every year. Australia has a good track record of medical research. We've got 5 Nobel laureates over time, and we also have a good track record of commercialising medical research with companies like Cochlear and ResMed and so on. So this is a terrific initiative which is about increasing our research capacity, but also our capacity to commercialise what we develop in this country. And if there's nothing more important than being and continuing to be a knowledge economy as well as all of our other strengths, and this is a terrific measure to address those issues.
We're almost out of time. One more issue that has dominated the news this week, and that is the Commonwealth Bank chief's apology to customers who lost millions of dollars after being given bad advice from the CBA's financial planners. Do the measures Ian and Nara have outlined obviate the need for a Royal Commission, Nick Champion?
Well, look, I think the government's shown a propensity to have royal commissions, and they should give this area proper consideration. We've had a very important Senate report led by Senator Williams, a National Party senator, calling for this measure. And I think the level of concern in the public about, in this case, losses in these various financial scandals does merit consideration of a royal commission. The other thing the government shouldn't be doing is scrapping the very sensible reforms we put in around the future of financial advice in the last Parliament. They shouldn't be scrapping those reforms.
I don't think it's quite right to say they're scrapping them.
We're certainly not scrapping them, and Nick knows that is absolutely not correct. But the key point is...
Well, why change them at all?
Because we need to get the right balance between consumer protection, and we're maintaining very strong consumer protection, but not having unnecessary red tape. And so that's why we're making some relatively minor changes, but the best interest duty, for example, is absolutely remaining, section 961B1 of the Corporations Act. But the key point on the Commonwealth Bank this week, they have come out now and announced their open advice review. That's an appropriate thing to do. It's a shame it took them as long as it did, but they now have got that process in place, including an independent panel to review.
But does it mean we no longer need a Royal Commission?
Well, what the Senate report said was that there could be a case for another review, including potentially a Royal Commission. It's a very detailed report. We first want to look at the details of that report, and obviously we want to look at how the Commonwealth Bank goes with this process. We expect it to be a thorough and fair process. That's what we will be looking to them to deliver. So Matthias Cormann, as the relevant minister, has said he first wants to look at the report in detail and also look at what the Commonwealth Bank does.
OK, we're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.